Welcome to the Public Land Advocate Podcast with your host, Professor Mick. And we are back with episode 5 of the Public Land Advocate Podcast in a wonderful warm spell from the cold weather we've been having. And we're excited to come today to talk to you guys about public land, the memories that we make on public land, and building up stories to tell. And this episode is going to be about one of those stories. In fact, it's going to be the story about this slammer right here, that buck that I affectionately nicknamed Brutus while I was hunting him. And I came to decide to want to tell this story because I have seen some of the things out there with the CJ Alexander buck and the fact that his story has changed a lot. And I think it's important to note that when we talk about poaching or the potential of poaching, this is an issue that affects every single one of us. Why does it affect every single one of us? Well, simply put, there is not an animal on this continental United States and Alaska and Hawaii that is not shaped by some sort of public dollar touching the benefit of that animal. So whether it's the science that has been publicly funded to teach people how to grow bigger and better deer through the National Deer Association and numerous colleges and universities nationwide and internationally, or it's the programs that are out there that help people get access to funds to grow giant deer, to protect animals. I think it's important to note that poaching robs people of that opportunity to be able to do this. And as someone who shot a deer that went into the Oklahoma State record books inside the top 100 biggest deer of all time, at the point in time in which it was killed, there were some major slammers knocked down, so we'll have to see where that shakes out. I was eligible to receive the Cy Curtis Award for that. I'm going to hold that up for the podcast to see on YouTube. There's my Cy Curtis Award, the acknowledgement of it. Brutus scored officially 160 and no 8. So he's 160 on the money official score after all of the deductions, which was just good enough to break top 100 deer for the Cy Curtis Award in the state of Oklahoma. And to me, he's the largest deer that I have ever harvested personally. And this story is great. This story starts in July of 2022. So, July of 2022, I had a hip not a hip replacement, but I had a hip arthroscopic and laparoscopic surgery for repair. Unfortunately, the damage to my hip at that point in time was too much for us to fix in that surgery. So I ended up having the entire labrum in my hip removed, as well as 100% of the cartilage on both my femur and hip capsule removed. Didn't know that until I went in for my 10-day out from surgery to have my stitches and everything else removed, met with the physician, and I got hit with this news. You're not going to be able to run. You might not be able to hike. Walking may be painful, and you probably won't be able to drag a deer out of the woods ever again until you have your hip replaced. And the doctor was incredibly apologetic for the fact the surgery didn't go the way that we wanted it to. So that lit a fire underneath me. I said, I'm going to go hunt as much as possible. And through a friend, I connected with a small piece of property out in between Tulsa and Oklahoma City. And that property had deer on it. It was a travel way, but it also was incredibly thick in parts of that property where it butted up against a small working cattle operation and then an entire street of houses that are out in this area. So seek one, eat your hearts out for this. And I actually went to look at that property the day after I got cleared from crutches. I had to go pick up one of my friends from the OKC airport. He was moving to Denver at the time, and I made him come with me, and we had the sweat fest of deer scouting because it was well over 100 degrees at this point in time when we went and looked at this property. We saw deer trails, we saw a deer sign, and I said, yeah, man, like, I'm gonna pursue this. Because at this time, I didn't know if I was going to be able to do anything on public land. It was so incredibly painful to walk, to do anything. And I said, let's go. Let's do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to hang a tree stand here. I'm going to put a lick block in, and I'm going to use a ground blind in this area in conjunction with a feeder because baiting is legal in the state of Oklahoma. So I made all my plans. I took tons of aerial photos from Google Maps and Onyx, and I scouted that area out. I put cameras up, and the whole time, from the time I was able to put cameras up, September 1st, until the November 16th. And I'll remember it's November 16th because I went out to sit the day that it had snowed, hoping that the first snowstorm of Oklahoma in 2022 at that time, was going to push some deer to go to the feeder or that they were going to be moving. I got off work, I drove out, and I sat. Well, up to that whole time, I had never seen a buck on camera. And I know that there's a lot of guys who say, if I don't see a buck, I'm not going. Well, I went, and I was able to harvest does that season. I actually put 2 does in the freezer prior to this happening. Both of them, I say like this entire season, was all first kills with a bow. It was actually a crossbow. I was shooting a center point Wrath 430X because I had my shoulder repaired in 2021 after a lifting accident where I had a almost complete tear of my rotator cuff. So I'd had a couple bang up seasons where I couldn't go in the woods, I couldn't bow hunt. I was new to Oklahoma, COVID was happening, and all I wanted to do was go outside. So I made it my mission this time to hunt. So I was looking at pictures after November 19th, right? So November 16th, this snowstorm had happened. It had actually snowed, cleared up on the 16th. There was no snow left. I had to wait from the 15th to the 19th to go back out due to work commitments. The 19th was the start of Thanksgiving break for the institution I worked at and still do work at in Oklahoma. So I went out, and that morning I saw my first buck within bow range. The beautiful little 6-point, ended up knocking it down. He went maybe 30 yards through double lung and hard shot. Ethical, clean, easy. First buck, I was super stoked. And I immediately took a couple photos of it because the way it'd fallen, his antlers had caught in a small tree and made it look like he was sitting up staring at me while I was on the blood trail. So I had to get some photos of that to show to people. Well, when I pulled out my iPad, slapped my memory cards in my card reader, after getting that deer loaded up into the car, I pulled both trail camera cards and I started looking. And I saw this deer that I didn't believe was real. He actually came in the night of the snowstorm. There's still snow on the ground. First time I got a picture of him. And he's huge. Biggest deer I've ever seen outside of a high fence game reserve. From when I had worked in Texas. And this deer was something that I knew was a special deer at that point in time. I decided I had one day before I had other plans that was going to take me through like almost the end of hunting season that I wanted to be out. And I had to go do. And those plans were a Thanksgiving issue. I had some other stuff that I had planned. So I looked and I saw the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, the 23rd of November, that the wind was going to be perfect for me to be able to go out and get into the deer stand. And that wind was a south-southwest wind. It actually swirled a lot that day. So I got out and I got into the deer stand, or into the ground blind, because I hadn't seen him yet on the tree stand camera at all. I had seen another buck that was like a big 8-point that I was like, this deer would also be the biggest buck I have ever shot in my life in terms of rack development. Well, I never saw that 8-point ever again, except for that one time. Later, come to find out, as part of the Brutus story, that deer played a role in that. So, go out. I'm sitting down in the ground blind. I am attentive. The wind's blowing. I had put out some doe and estrus scent because I had does hitting this feeder hard every single day, every other day. These does were coming in. And right at about 8:18, I know because I had checked my phone, 2 does start to come up to the feeder. And because I'd harvested a couple of does and my scent was out there, they were a little skittish to come into the feeder. But they came in. And I had to do everything I can to not spook these deer. Because I told myself, we're in the rut. If there's an opportunity for these does to come and Brutus isn't with them, maybe he'll be by later. And so I like took a picture of him, like kind of slid it up over the edge of the ground blind, took a picture of him, sent it to my dad, and I was texting him while I was out. And then I'm sitting there and I get hungry at about 9 o'clock, and I texted my dad, you know, I'm like, maybe this isn't going to happen today. I only had until noon to be out there. So I had from like 6 a.m. when I got there to noon. And the reason I had until noon to get there is because I had told my partner that I was going to help her with Thanksgiving dinner preparations and that I would be back no later than 1 o'clock from having to drive to where I was to coming home. Famous last words, right? That's how all good stories start. I made a promise. I had a timeline. I knew I needed to do stuff. 9 o'clock, texted my dad. I'm like, I haven't seen anything. I haven't heard anything. He was busy because he was out doing a pheasant hunt in Cleveland, Ohio, where he lives. And I'm sitting there. I'm having my coffee. I brought a thermos of coffee. I brought a blueberry and cinnamon raisin bagel, not a blueberry bagel, a cinnamon raisin bagel, which is one of my favorites. I usually, if I'm going to sit for a long time, I'll have an uncooked and a cooked bagel. For whatever reason, I said I wanted to eat like the uncooked bagel. I was dipping it in my coffee, and I'm like sitting there kind of chewing on this dry bagel, like slumped down in my chair, feeling defeated, like this deer wasn't going to show up. And then I see a little bit of movement out of the corner of my eye, and I turn my head, and I have a mouthful of bagel. My phone is sitting, like, kind of like when you lean back and you sit there, you know, you make that little spot to put your phone, if you got a little extra stomach like I do. And all of a sudden, Brutus picks his head up. And I almost choked to death on my bagel, because I had never seen a deer that big within 30 yards. And like it literally looked like the king of the forest picked his head up. And all of a sudden, like, I got my first glimpse of this deer for real. And he's huge, right? He's huge. And I'll take, for our YouTube video for this, I'll actually film at the end of this some of what he looks like hanging on the wall behind me. You can see him if you're watching the YouTube video. He was huge. Just a giant. And like, I'd grown up my whole life reading about deer like this. I never expected to be somebody to harvest a buck like this, let alone after all of the stuff that I was told this summer. So I'm sitting there, and my only thought is like, don't choke on your bagel. Like force yourself to swallow this, because if you choke, if you go and make that like choke noise or cough or anything, this deer is gone. Like, he knew something was up. But he wanted to be in the area I was because those does were there earlier in the morning, and one of them had to also be an estrus because he was hell-bent on being in that area and sniffing out these does with the wind. And he starts to come towards me, and the way my ground blind was situated at the time, I was kind of in a little defilade where I was lower than the feeder, so I was kind of looking up. It's actually about 3 feet above the elevation where my ground blind was. And there's a big pine tree and a little knoll that he ended up walking around. I saw this deer, and he like turned broadside, and I knew there's no way I can get my bow up and just whip a shot out through there. And just to see this deer, huge deer. I was so giddy. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe that I'm getting to see this deer, that he's here. Like, what do I do? Like, I slowly like tuck my phone down into the hoodie pouch I was wearing, because I had on a black camo hoodie inside my ground blind. One of the things I wore like all the time was that black camo hoodie and a black like overshirt that had some pockets on it so I could stash, you know, my deer blind snacks and put stuff. And this deer is like going, and I have to like slowly sit up in my chair so it doesn't make noise, and get my shooting stick and get everything. And I'm like, I know I can't make a shot on this deer at this time. I hope he comes around and comes back where I can see him again. I thought I had spooked him. I thought he had looked at me, we'd made eye contact, and he went, I'm out, fam. And that was it. And I was almost like, I was living on a prayer and a hope, like a shoestring at that point, that he was gonna turn and come up. And luckily enough, he did. But this deer was smart. He was a little skittish, but he wanted to be there. He had one thing on his mind, and that was the ladies. And so he goes to sniffing around. But the way he had come in and what he was doing is he made it so I never really got a broadside shot on Brutus. Because this story would be much shorter if I did. So he was like dancing around, keeping his chest to me. And finally he stopped, and he was sniffing. He had his head up, then it was down, and then it was up. And he was trying to smell where these does were with the other doe and estrus scent that I had in the area. And I had my crossbow up on my Primos trigger stick. I'm looking through the scope. I'm watching this deer. And this all took place from about 9:20 in the morning to the time I pulled the trigger was 9:42. And I know that exactly because I pulled the trigger on a frontal shot and it hit him. And I watched this arrow hit this deer, and it rocked him back to the point where his haunches almost touched the ground. Right? I said, I'm shooting him. I know I can make this shot. Whack! I hit him in the chest, and like big grunt where the air is being forced out of his lungs. And I could see clearly enough that he was starting to exsanguinate out of his chest. There was blood from where he had been hit, had sprayed 4.5 feet from where he was hit forward. And I had seen like what looked like an arterial spray come out, and I thought, oh my God, please fall over. Please fall over. Like, just roll over backwards and die. Like, just tumble backwards, and that would be the end of it. Oh, man. That was not the case. He ended up getting his legs under him, and he took off. And when he took off, he kicked this log that I had put in place to kind of funnel deer to force them at times to turn sideways for a good broadside shot, and also to kind of control how they could enter and exit. And he kicked this log and broke it. I just remember when I saw it, stunned disbelief. This is about 4 inches around. And I just went, oh my God, I shot him. I got that adrenaline dump. My hands start shaking. And I thought I heard him crash. Well, what I'd heard is he fell down several times running. And I thought he crashed. I thought he was dead. I'm like, oh my God, I got to call my dad. I got to call my dad and I got to tell him. And this went on for, I tried to unlock my iPhone. I looked at this because I had a balaclava on. I didn't pull it off. My hands are shaking so bad. I drop my phone. I pick it up. I can't type in my passcode to my phone. I get locked out of my phone for a minute. Finally, 9:45, I call my dad. And I am hysterical. And my dad answers the phone. He had just gotten home from what he was doing. And I told him, I shot him. The first words out of my mouth, I shot Brutus. And I'm crying. I am ecstatic. I am shaking. My chair in the ground blind is making noise like crazy. I'm moving around because I can't believe that I harvested that buck. Well, or I thought I did. Right? So I'm going bananas on the phone with my dad. Every emotion, I am crying. I am what he thought I was hurt. He thought I was inconsolably hurt, even though he knew that I said I had shot Brutus. I'm losing it at this point in time. I'm so excited for what had just transpired and knowing I had made a good frontal shot on this giant buck. Well, he finally gets me calmed down, and he said, you have to call Courtney, because this is going to be an effort to get a deer this big out of anywhere. So I do. And I still hadn't had all that adrenaline bleed off yet, so I called her, and I'm like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, I shot him, I can't believe this. Her first thought was that somebody was trespassing on the property I was on, and we got into an argument, and I killed somebody. And her first words were, you need to call the cops. And we'd been on the phone for 3 minutes before I get out that I had shot a deer. That's how excited I was for this to happen. And I was so giddy and so excited and so over the moon that this had happened. And I just couldn't believe it. I just couldn't. So I always said, I usually set a timer on my phone. I didn't. I had to go by the amount of time that I was on the phone with my dad. I was on the phone with my partner, and I wanted to go find this deer, and I just couldn't wait. And I had seen the blood. I had seen everything, and there's a good blood trail for this deer, and it's he painted the forest with this blood trail. There was consistent, just big puddles of blood, 12-inch dinner plate, and it went all the way to the fence with the property, and that's where I stopped. And I said, I have to do the right thing, because if I do not, this will ruin everything. So I ended up texting the game warden for the county that I had known. We had a talk, and he told me he's going to look up what's going on. He asked me to send him the trail camera picture out of the buck that I had on my phone. I sent it to him, and he said, I don't know these people. Here's their address. So I ended up going to talk to these people, and they were super nice. I told them who I was, where I was hunting. I showed them my lease paperwork at that time. And they saw, the woman saw the badge for where I worked hanging in the window of my car when she's talking to me next to my car. And she said, do you work there? I said, yeah. And she said, oh, I'm the niece of this person. And I said, what are the odds that person was the out of committee person on the hiring committee when I was hired in 2019, because this person also took early retirement when COVID had happened. And then she said, let me text this person just to make sure. But she said, until I get an answer back, I'll text you. Go ahead and look for your deer. I'm not going to tell you no for a deer of that caliber. And I said, it was this deer and this big 8. I would hopefully the big 8 like comes back. And she said, oh, we harvested that deer. And my son, who hunts this property and lives down the road, and she gestured down the road that they lived on, has been hunting that deer. In fact, the deer you showed me a picture of, if you did shoot it, is the deer that everyone in this area has pictures of. And he's been not as big as he is now, but he's been the county legend. And holy crap. That kind of made my like heart rate get back up. She said, I'll text you, but go ahead, follow the blood trail, cross onto our property. Let me know if you need any help. I said, sweet, thank you, I will. So I go back, get to where I had tied off a rag on the fence, hop the fence. The deer, Brutus, had stumbled around quite a bit, and I thought for sure, based on the amount of blood that he left in this area, he was going to be within 10 yards of where he was. I ended up tracking the blood trail another 30 yards till it became, and very disheartening, just pins. Pin drops. And it was like blood, no blood, no blood, pin, no blood. And it got to a point where her son had a feeder and a blind set up. And I said, I know this deer, he's not going to go in front of that ground blind. He's not going to risk getting hurt for a second time. So I put an arrow in the ground. I turn on a knock. I call my dad. I said, I don't know what to do. He said, back out. See if you can find somebody to help you track this deer. So being the day before Thanksgiving, I get on Oklahoma blood trackers. I start calling everybody in the area. Some of them are already leaving for Thanksgiving. Some of them are starting shifts at work. Some of them don't answer the phone. So at this point, I don't know what to do. Well, I'm sitting in my car making these phone calls and researching. The landowner's son comes up, says he couldn't find the deer. I said, okay. Knowing full well that this person had approached me, he's pretty heated about not getting a shot at that buck. And one of the things he said to me is, he said, I hope you don't find it because I'd like to get him next year, or find the dead head later. And I was like, all right, like, it's hunting. We don't own deer, but I'm not going to get into a fight with somebody who shows up on a four-wheeler open carrying a pistol. So I finally connect with a tracker, and this person says that she will bring her dog out. And she will come out right away. Like, not right away. She's got to go drop off some hay. So she says she'll be out about 2:30. So we go to, or I don't go anywhere. I just sit there. I don't know what to do. I'm just going to sit in my car. I'm going to eat the rest of my food. I'm going to drink my coffee. And then the landowner on the other side of me, I see somebody in orange with a rifle coming up, and I talk to this guy, and he thought I was poaching on his property, because he'd wondered who'd ended up hunting that property. He couldn't find the owner, couldn't talk to the guy. And so we ended up talking, and he's like, well, when the tracking dog gets here, if they can get here, here's my number. Let me know. He's like, I'm going to hunt that blind right there. So give me a text message, and I'll help you guys. So sure enough, like, the person gets there, and I'm so excited to see a tracking dog work, because in my mind, I've created this picture of this person is going to have like a bloodhound, a hound dog, something to bay when it's on the blood trail. And I'm so excited that this person came out. Like, I'm beyond words. I get out, I introduce myself, and this whole time I'm looking through the window on this lady's truck, and I'm like, where's the dog, right? I love dogs. My family trains dogs. They work with dogs up in Cleveland, Ohio, and we had, dogs have been in my life forever, as far as I could remember. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to get to see a dog work. Because I love to see dogs work. And I'm like, I'm not trying to be obvious that I'm looking for this dog, but I'm looking for this dog. And she's like, oh yeah, he's in the back. And I like kind of lean over and look to the bed. No dog. And I'm like, I hope this little person's dog didn't jump out. And she opens the back door, and out she pulls the most gorgeous little long-haired dachshund I've ever seen. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. The little dachshund's gonna help me find this deer. I'm not gonna lie, I turned around, my heart sank. I'm never gonna find this deer. Like, I don't know what had happened to this deer whatsoever. I'm like, this is not good. So anyway, she like hooks him up. The other landowner's name is Josh, came out, and we get on the track. The first place the dog took us was to the deer that I had shot on the 19th. We take him, we put him on the correct trail, and this whole time, like, oh, this is not good. And everybody's looking at the blood going, I can't believe you didn't find this deer. There's blood. The dog takes off like a shot, goes down the trail. We get to the fence. We cross the fence. We had notified the game warden, the landowner, that we're tracking this. And they said that they're busy. Otherwise, they'd come out and help us. And this deer was special because now they had told me that they had texted everybody that they knew was hunting this deer. And they were trying to find volunteers to come help us find this deer. It had turned into like an entire county effort at this point in time for where I was, or at least this part of the county that I was in. And everybody wanted to see it if we found it. So we're on the trail and we get to where my arrow was in the ground, and in my head I was like, I know this deer went down this little hill and then into the hardwoods that were right next to it, another 25 yards. Maximum distance, maybe 35 yards this deer could have traveled. Sure enough, as soon as we get down to the bottom of this little embankment, we see another huge gout of blood on the ground. The blood trail started up, and I was so excited. We get into the woods. We find a spot where he had just laid down, and we thought he was dying. And the dog is running around, sniffing everything, trying to get the trail back. And I look up, and 10 yards away, I said, that's him. And I started to like get giddy, like I wanted to jump up and down. I said, that's him. He's right there. That's the deer. And Josh and the tracker look at me and they say, no, that's just a down tree. I said, that's him. And sure enough, that was him right there, stone dead. And what we figured happened is he'd laid down to die, and the son of the landowner on the four-wheeler had spooked him up. And he got up, went 10 yards, stone dead. And I remember the tracker, she asked me, can I turn the dog loose so he can go get his reward? And I said, yeah, for sure. She's like, usually he just likes to chew on the back legs of the deer. And she like unclipped the leash, and that little dachshund shot forward like an arrow and just viciously latched on to the testicles of the now deceased Brutus. And I remember like taking pictures with the deer. She took pictures with the deer and the dog. The other person, Josh, had taken pictures. And we were like just beyond excited. Like everybody had jumped up and down. We had celebrated. We were ready to go. And we were like, how are we getting this deer out of here? Because I was still struggling with my hip. We texted the landowner. They came, they brought a UTV, and it took 4 people to load this deer into the bed of it. And they said, don't worry, we'll just drive you to the car. So like 3 of us get in. Josh goes and walks back the blood trail, crosses the lease, goes to where he was hunting, and goes to sit because he was getting text notifications on his phone. So they ended up driving us out. We're talking. As we make the main road, trucks and SUVs start to appear, and people want to start taking pictures and take pictures of this deer because they had notified the people who were looking to come help us, that we'd found the deer and everybody wanted to see it. I think there are more photos taken of the deer by everybody going by us than we had taken of the deer. And it was like one of the most exhilarating things. And I remember like getting back, the tracker said I ended up like having to work with the tracker because I needed to get paid so I could pay them. I ended up paying them double what they had asked me to pay them. They were super nice. I couldn't be more thankful. This whole time I am going through this, I can only think that my partner, who I've kept in the loop this entire time, is so mad because she's had to cook Thanksgiving dinner by herself this entire time. And she was definitely upset by this because I called her on the phone, I could tell. So like I remember like the moment it felt so real was not the moment I touched him, but the moment I had submitted that we had killed the deer, and I ended up texting the game warden, and everybody knew, and it was beyond amazing. And that's the story of Brutus, who officially had 19 scorable points on him, and what they would consider 23 points that you could hang a ring off of, but were not scorable under the Cy Curtis methods. That crossbow bolt had ended up going through one lung, severing the artery going down into his leg, and then punched through the liver into the rest of the body cavity. It was 10 inches deep into him. And I have a picture when we were manipulating the deer. Josh had said, hey, like, what's that glowing inside this deer? Like a toxic green color. And it was actually the light up knock from the crossbow bolt that you could see inside the chest cavity. And I took a picture of that. And I'll put pictures of us with the deer there. And the reason I wanted to tell this story and take this as episode 5 is because this is a memory that not only do I share for my own satisfaction, but I share this memory with the landowners, the tracker, Josh, the other landowner, my partner, my dad. And even though it only happened a year ago, it still gets brought up in jokes, especially when it's time to cook dinner. And I go hunting that morning, and I know that I'm going to cook dinner for my partner and her family, or we're going to do something big. And she's like, don't kill another big deer, so I have to do this by myself. And it's one of the most special moments of my hunting life so far. And it's why I choose to continue to advocate for the outdoors. And the reason I started this episode with the CJ Alexander buck is because, to me, poaching is one of those things that we as the public need to become more upset about when or if we find out that it's the truth, because our tax dollars go into supporting and raising these animals, especially when we look to recent news out of Wyoming that cattle ranchers and the grazers on the Bureau of Land Management land out there want the Bureau of Land Management to foot the bill for bringing back wild sheep to that part of Wyoming. I'm a huge supporter of doing that, of having more opportunities, of the conservation that's going to come with this. But the biggest kicker to me, and why I believe that poaching is something that should hurt all of us, is because our taxpayer money goes to fund all of these things and goes to fund everything that we have in the outdoors. And all of these opportunities should be available not just to those people who can pay the most money. And the reason I told the story about Brutus is because I've told this story to well over 200 people now, and that story hasn't changed. And there have been offers for me to lease Brutus as a shoulder mount to people who travel and do shows in the state of Oklahoma and outside the state of Oklahoma for part of the Big Buck Club because of this deer. And one of the things and why I bring up poaching, I bring up CJ Alexander, we bring up Chris Brackett, and these other people have been caught poaching, is because, or suspected of poaching, is because there is money involved in this. There is people who can make money off of this. And our money as the hunting public goes into any animal that exists in the United States at this point in time. And we should care about these things. And as part of my journey with Brutus, there were people who had accused me of poaching who did have pictures of Brutus on the trail camera and on their trail cameras from the night before. There were people online who said that they had seen the deer and wanted to tell me how much of a terrible person I was for all of this. And I understand that there is going to be skepticism. Luckily, our contact with the game warden and all of the steps that we took to ensure the ethical harvest of this deer was just out of this world for what we were doing. And it really allowed us, myself, the tracker, to be covered. Plus, the state of Oklahoma has you sign an affidavit that what you did was true for this. So the lesson in all of this is that no matter what happens, always try to do things legally. Because one of the greatest things I heard was from Clay Newcomb on the Bear Grease podcast, is that there are going to be times where we have definitely broken game laws and maybe not known about it. There might be issues that we have caused that we didn't know about. And the more that we can strive to do things ethically and legally, the better it is, not only for the public, but for the animals as well. And that's why when I listen to the CJ Alexander story, and we have articles that were printed about him, we have the Hunter podcast or the Hunting Advantage podcast, we have TikTokers, we have Instagram people talking about it. It's important to look at the story and to see how the story either stays the same or changes. And one thing that, as public landowners and owners of the money that gets taxed and put into the conservation and the cultivation of wildlife throughout the United States, we should expect these people to tell us the truth. And then when they're punished, we should not feel sorry for them. So we need to be aware of all of that. We need to be aware that poaching is a serious thing. If you see something, you should say something to the game wardens. And I know a lot of people out there don't trust the government, and there's a large conspiracy of the government in the CJ Alexander story based on all the different things that had happened. And the biggest thing that we can do as the hunting public is realize that, like, we are invested in these animals, in this land, in going out and taking care of the land that we have available to us, that it's our duty to see something, to say something. And I was recently involved in a TikTok discussion, because we do run the Public Land Advocate on TikTok as well, where we do skits, we cut pieces of the podcast, and we do these just to engage in conversation and talk about public land usage. We want people to be aware that, like, our license fees, our use and talking to game wardens is an important part of the process of not only keeping ourselves safe as hunters, but keeping the resources and the animals safe from theft. Because when you poach, you steal from not only the land, you steal from every person who pays taxes. And that's a huge issue that I think needs to be covered. And that's something that states should do to tighten game laws and game restrictions for what is happening. And I just want to say thank you to everybody listening. We're going to do, actually, instead of the public land enemy this week, we're going to do the public land winner, which is the University of Montana, which recently, as a public land grant institution, started to have classes about hunting, scouting, foraging as a credit-based class that you can take for an elective for many degrees, and as part of a wildlife management class. And I think that that is amazing for a public land grant institution to offer this class for students to take towards their degree, to expose people who might not be able to be exposed to the outdoors. I also think about how things like this are essential to younger people as well. Because when I was growing up and I lived in Decatur, Illinois, the city of Decatur actually had a Go Fish program to experience fishing that the city would pay for. They had a person who worked for the city. His name was Clint. He was an awesome person. He tolerated me one-on-one way more than he probably should have. Because when I wasn't playing baseball, I wasn't golfing, I wasn't doing other things, I would ask my mom, I'd beg her, I'm like, please sign me up for this so I can go fishing. She would drop me off, 3 hours would go by in the blink of an eye, and it was an awesome program. And one day I was younger, I was sitting down, I was talking to Clint, and he said he probably teaches an average of 300 people a summer about fishing. And while that doesn't seem like that much in a city that at the time was 200,000 people, I wonder, some of those people, that might have been their first foray into a lifelong experience with the outdoors. And that's why talking about public land, it matters, because that was a city park in the middle of the city of Decatur that they stocked and that they took care of. And it was an awesome opportunity to get kids into the outdoors and to teach them the love for the outdoors. And almost everybody I saw there when I was a kid caught a fish. So it was a great opportunity. At the end of this episode too, we do want to do some thank yous to people who have supported the channel. We want to thank G&H Decoys for supporting the Public Land Advocate, because in my personal life, I almost got stuck in the marsh before I had my hip replacement surgery in December, and I had to leave some decoys behind, and G&H Decoys actually reached out to me and told me to message them and say that they would replace the decoys I left as long as I would continue to tell my story about knowing when enough was enough. Because 2 days before that happened, unfortunately, in the state of Oklahoma, we had a young man step off a ledge and perish while out duck hunting. And my story for that is nothing is worth having to potentially risk your life or someone else's life for. So thank you to G&H Decoys for supporting the Public Land Advocate podcast. Thank you, Ben, very much. I appreciate it beyond words. I can't wait to get out there and to tour and to talk to you in person. I'm almost coming up on when I can go for longer trips now. We would also like to thank, as the Public Land Advocate, Hunt Vault for being a supporter and sharing the things that we do. Hunt Vault is a monthly subscription of some of the best curated hunting gear that you can get. I've gotten knives, I've gotten binocular harnesses, I've gotten backpacks. I actually have their backpack behind me on some side of me right here, which is their trail camera backpack. And we're going to, for those of you on YouTube, we're going to show that and some other major supporters of what we're doing. So Hunt Vault has a camera backpack that you can put all of your trail camera needs into this. It actually comes with the ability to put 6 SD cards and almost a dozen trail cameras inside that. So Hunt Vault, thank you very much for that. We'd also like to thank the Montana Knife Company for always liking the stuff that we put out on YouTube, where we do little sneak peeks of what is happening and what they are on there as well. So thank you to the Montana Knife Company. Thank you to Hunt Vault. Here's my Montana Knife Company collection. And for those of you on YouTube that are still watching, here is the Beast, Brutus, 160 scoreable inches, a deer with a ton of character. And one of the cool things is under one of his eyes, they actually pulled out a broken piece of another horn that had calloused over, or another antler that had calloused over from when he was fighting. He had a scar, and this was an amazing story, and it's what really fired me up to talk about public land and to talk about the experiences that I have. So we'd like to sign off and thank you all for watching. Thank you all for listening and supporting the channel. And remember, these stories and the things that we do, these are lifetime memories that we make as individuals. So thank you, everybody. Have a great week. And you'll see our next episode next week. We're going to try to go to weekly releases from now on. So we're going to try to get some people to interview as well. That's coming up in the future. Thank you guys so much. And remember, go outside, enjoy public land, and have fun.